Hey everyone, welcome to tonight's deep dive into the Middle Ages. We're going to explore a time of plagues, punishments, and pottage. Forget the glamorous castles and knights in shining armor that Hollywood loves to show us. The reality. You probably wouldn't survive a single day. But don't worry, I'm here to walk you through it. Before we jump into the gritty details, take a second to like this video and subscribe if you're enjoying what I do here. And don't forget to let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always so cool to see how this community stretches around the world. Now, let's set the scene. Imagine you've just woken up in the year 1325. The good news, you're alive. The bad news, so are the fleas. You're lying on a half-rotted straw mattress, filled with hay and bugs that smell like, well, a barn floor. Why? Because it used to be a barn 3 months ago. Forget about memory foam, pillows, or Egyptian cotton sheets. The best you've got is a wool blanket that hasn't been washed since last winter, and it now weighs about as much as a small cow from all the accumulated grime. You blink awake, and the church bell clangs in the distance. That's your medieval version of an alarm clock. It's louder, more obnoxious, and far less forgiving than any modern alarm. Your home is a one-room wooden hut with no windows and an open-concept floor plan. Yes, your family, livestock, and all the domestic insects live under the same roof. As for the smell, a delightful mix of stale beer, human sweat, goat, and something that might be mold, but you'd rather not think about it. Stretching? Yeah, that's a bad idea. The air is cold, and your joints feel like you've just gone 10 rounds with a rabid badger. At 22, you're practically middle-aged by medieval standards. Your spine cracks like an old door, and your knees sound like a bag of rocks being shaken. Getting out of bed, it's like rolling the dice. The floor could be wet from last night's rain, which leaks through the thatched roof, or it could be crusty from your neighbor's chicken's recent accident. Either way, your bare feet are now part of the ecosystem. Oh, and privacy. What's that? Your entire family, and maybe even a cousin who just never left, are waking up beside you. There are no curtains, no bedrooms, no personal time. It's a communal experience, everything, including the fleas. Welcome to your morning in medieval Europe, where you're never truly alone because parasites, rodents, and 8 other people are always with you. And this is just the start of your day. Trust me, it only gets worse from here. So, you've crawled out of your medieval haystack of horrors. Nice job. Now, nature calls. And by calls, I mean it's practically screaming at you. Here's where you start missing modern bathrooms. No toilet, no seat, no toilet paper, and certainly no plunger in sight. If you're a peasant, your bathroom is probably a wooden bucket behind the house. It's already full, thanks to Uncle Wolfstan's bad turnip experience last night. The smell, biblical. You hold your breath, do your business, and then here's the kicker, you toss it into the street. Yes, the street. You're supposed to shout Gare-de-Loup French for watch out below before tossing it out the window. Of course, no one moves fast enough. Medieval streets are open sewers, a charming river of human waste, animal droppings, and liquids you'd rather not examine. If you're lucky enough to live in a town with public latrines, congrats. You get to sit shoulder to shoulder with strangers in an outhouse where privacy is a joke and ventilation is cruel. If you're in a castle, it's a little better, right? Maybe. You might have a guard robe a hole in the wall that drops everything directly into the moat. Great idea, except your enemies know this. So yeah, attackers sometimes climbed through the waste chute. Talk about entering through the back door. Whether you're a farmer or a baron, medieval toileting is a humiliating ritual. It's cold, public, dangerous, and always disgusting. One slip on a wet stone path, and you're face first in humanity's leftovers, and you haven't even brushed your teeth yet. But don't worry, we'll get there. You survived the toilet. Now you deserve a reward, right? Maybe a nice breakfast. Sorry, not in medieval Europe. Breakfast is grim. No eggs Benedict, no coffee machines sputtering awake, and definitely no avocado toast. Instead, you get a wooden bowl of something that looks like it was scraped off a muddy boot. Welcome to your daily ration of pottage. Pottage is a thick, gloopy stew made from whatever ingredients you can find. Grains, root vegetables, maybe a few beans if you're lucky. It's been simmering in the same pot for days, sometimes weeks, and guess what? New ingredients just get dumped on top of the old ones. It's less of a recipe and more of an ongoing, edible experiment. On the side, there's a hunk of bread so hard it could deflect arrows. It's made from coarse rye or barley flour, often mixed with sawdust, acorns, or whatever else you can find, because wheat is a rich person's dream. This loaf isn't your friend. You don't slice it, you negotiate with it. And drinks. Forget about orange juice or oat milk lattes. You're drinking beer at 6 a.m. Why? Because the water is crawling with parasites and filth. So, you start your day with weak ale. It's low on alcohol, but high on survivability. Kids drink it too. No one loves it, but it won't kill you immediately. Want meat or cheese? Dream on. That's reserved for Sundays or the occasional feast day, if your lord is feeling generous. Most peasants don't get meat more than a few times a year. As for fresh fruit, only if it's in season and hasn't already turned into wine. Don't even think about spices unless you're royalty. A pinch of pepper costs more than your monthly wages. Salt, it's locked away like treasure. So you chew your gritty bread, wash it down with medieval beer, and try not to think about the rat that may have nibbled your porridge overnight. Breakfast doesn't energize you. It just happens to you. Now that you've had your sad medieval breakfast, it's time to get dressed. But don't think that's going to make things any better. Your wardrobe consists of one outfit, just one, a rough wool tunic or linen shift that you've worn every single day for months, if not years. There's no such thing as seasonal fashion in the Middle Ages. Your only option is to wear it until it disintegrates or gives you a fungal infection. Underwear, optional. If you're lucky, maybe a linen under tunic. If you're not, well, you're going commando under layers of scratchy, sweaty wool. It's all lovingly stitched together by someone who may or may not know what a seam is supposed to look like. And washing, forget it. No washing machine, no soap, no dry cleaners in sight. If you even wanted to wash your clothes, it's not as easy as tossing them in a washing machine and hitting a button. You have to haul water from a river, heat it over a fire, scrub your tunic on a wooden board with ashes, then hang it out to dry, which, in your part of the world, only happens about 3 days a year. Shoes, if you own any, they're made of untreated leather, barely stitched together, and offer as much arch support as a banana peel. Most peasants just go barefoot through the mud, through the dung, through sharp rocks, and puddles of disease. It's a miracle if you don't step on something that'll leave you crippled for life. All this means one thing: your skin hates you. You itch constantly. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs are living rent-free all over your body. Everyone's got them nobles, lousy monks, itchy children, and walking insect farms. No one is free from them. You'll be scratching your armpits with a wooden spoon while chatting with the local priest, and no one will bat an eye. Your skin is raw from the constant rubbing your scalp a battlefield of bites, and if you develop a rash, well, too bad. There's no dermatologist, no hydrocortisone. If you're lucky enough to avoid an infection, that rash will just stick around for the next 6 months as your unwanted, medieval sidekick. Now that you're dressed in misery, wrapped in discomfort, it's time to head outside and start working yourself to death. But before you do, let's talk about one thing: your teeth. In the Middle Ages, smiling is a dangerous game, not emotionally, but dentally. There's no toothbrush, no toothpaste, no mouthwash, no floss. The idea of oral hygiene is about as popular as bathing, which, let's face it, isn't very popular at all. Some people might chew on a twig or rinse their mouth with wine or vinegar, but for the most part, your teeth are on their own, and they're not doing great. By the time you hit your mid-20s, your smile will look like something pulled from a haunted crypt. Cavities are rampant, gums are swollen, and those aren't just food stains on your teeth. That's decay. You've got more rot in your mouth than the average medieval root cellar. Sugar. It's becoming more common among the rich, but if you're a peasant, you get to rot your teeth slowly, one bite of fermented bread at a time. Toothaches. Get used to them. They're like medieval weather. They're always there in the background, just waiting to make your life miserable. And what if you need to get a tooth pulled? Well, dentists don't exist, but barber surgeons do. Yes, the same guy who cuts your hair will also yank your infected tooth out with an iron hook. No anesthesia, no numbing agent, just excruciating pain and a very real chance of sepsis, because antibiotics aren't a thing yet. And the worst part, you've still got a long day ahead of you. So, you've managed to survive the toilet, your wardrobe, your teeth, and the fact that you're living in a constant state of physical misery. Now, it's time to work. But guess what? In the Middle Ages, there's no office, no desk, no coffee break, and definitely no chance of promotion. Your job, if you're like 90% of the population, is simple. Don't die while laboring for someone else's comfort. You're a peasant. That's it. Your job is to work the land that belongs to your Lord, who probably doesn't remember your name. You wake up with the sun and only stop when it disappears behind the trees. There's no clocking out. There's no weekend. You work 6 days a week, and Sunday is your only day, often less. Of course, you're harvesting, fighting off raiders, or praying that your infected toe doesn't turn black and fall off. The work is brutal. You plow the fields by hand, or, if you're lucky, you get an ox to help. You dig ditches, sow seeds, pull weeds, and carry water until your spine starts to resemble the letter S. No one cares if you're tired. No one asks how your mental health is doing. If you're a woman, surprise, you don't just work in the fields. You also take care of the kids, cook, clean, spin wool, feed animals, and pretend that your husband's lice infestation isn't slowly migrating to your side of the bed. Children start helping out around the age of 5. No school, no toys, just a tiny wooden rake and a dream of someday not dying of the flu. If you're lucky, maybe you're not a farmer. Maybe you're a blacksmith, a tanner, or a cooper. But let me tell you, you still work with fire, chemicals, or animal guts all day in poorly ventilated sheds. The pay, basically survival. The perks, occasional bleeding, broken bones, and fevers. And the worst part, you can't afford to stop working. If you don't work, you don't eat. If you don't eat, well, you get replaced. So, you keep going. You grip your shovel, ignore the blisters, and keep digging. Because in the Middle Ages, your job isn't a career. It's a slow-motion endurance test. Now that you're working yourself to the bone, let's talk about the weather. Because in the Middle Ages, temperature isn't just about seasons. It's more like an ongoing punishment from the sky. Let's start with winter. There's no insulation, no central heating, and definitely no weatherproofing. Your wooden walls have gaps that you could throw a chicken through, and your windows, they're covered with cloth, not glass. The fire in your hearth sounds nice in theory, but you can't keep it going for long because firewood is expensive, and sometimes gathering it from the forest is illegal. Yes, you can actually be executed for picking the wrong stick from the wrong forest. You bundle up in your one damp wool tunic, huddle near the dying embers, and still wake up with your nose frozen. Your feet are permanently cold, often damp, and your fingers are so stiff they feel like tiny medieval popsicles. Frostbite isn't diagnosed. It's just called bad luck. But don't worry, it gets better, right? Let's fast forward to summer. Sounds like a break, right? Wrong. In the summer, your home turns into a clay oven. There's no fan, no cross breeze, and no deodorant. You sweat through your layers, but you can't remove them because showing too much skin is scandalous and also invites sunburn, insect bites, and social judgment. The flies are out in full force, attracted to your unwashed body and the smell of last week's goat stew that's still fermenting in the corner. Mosquitoes buzz by your ear while you try to sleep, assuming you can sleep through the noise of your neighbors yelling and babies crying. In the fields, the sun bakes you. No sunblock, no hat, unless you've made one out of straw. And the worst part, you still have to work. Heatstroke is just called taking a bad turn. So, you're either shivering in your hovel, wondering if your toes will make it through to spring, or you're sweating through your only pair of socks while your thighs chafe into oblivion. And, throughout all of this, your clothes still itch, your food is still terrible, and your next job is still waiting. Welcome to climate control, medieval style. Spoiler alert, there is none. Feeling thirsty? Want to splash some water on your face to wake up from this damp fever dream of a life? Too bad. In medieval times, water isn't your friend, it's actually trying to kill you quietly. Let's start with drinking. The nearby stream looks fresh, bubbling, and clear, just like something out of a fantasy movie. But, spoiler alert, it's not. Upstream, someone just dumped a chamber pot into it. If that wasn't bad enough, there's probably a dead pig decomposing in it too. Parasites, bacteria, and a whole microbial army are just waiting in every sip. So, what do people drink instead? Beer. Yes, beer, even kids. But don't imagine medieval kids doing keg stands. No, it's small beer, weak in alcohol, but strong enough to survive the filth. Wine is another option, but only if you're rich enough to afford it. The wealthy can also enjoy clean water, but for everyone else, it's a gamble. Want to bathe? Surely you can clean yourself up, right? In theory, yes. In practice, absolutely not. People in the Middle Ages believed that bathing opened your pores and let in diseases. That's right, washing yourself was considered medically risky. You were cleaner, apparently, if you kept the layer of filth caked onto your skin. Communal bathhouses did exist, but they quickly gained reputations as places for gossip, scandal, and, occasionally, full-on medieval extracurriculars. So, naturally, the church got involved and shut many of them down. Even if you wanted to bathe, it wasn't easy. You'd have to haul water from the well, boil it over a fire, fill a leaky wooden tub, and pray no one used it before you, or, worse, after. The rainwater collected in open barrels where birds poop, insects breed, and moss thrives. Sound refreshing? Didn't think so. Water wasn't just for drinking or washing. It was also part of your food, and it wasn't great. There's no refrigeration, no freezing, just salt, smoke, or the hope that winter air will keep things fresh. Meat, if you're lucky, has been hanging for days, covered in flies, and marinated in questionable brine. Bread is the cornerstone of the medieval diet, but even that isn't safe. In bad harvest years, desperate peasants bulk it up with bark, sawdust, or even clay to make it stretch. And if it's rye season, there's a bonus: ergot, a fungus that causes convulsions, hallucinations, and sometimes death. It's like eating bread laced with LSD and tetanus. Vegetables, only when they're in season, but that's not a guarantee. And you know what's always in season? Turnips. So many turnips, boiled, mashed, or floating in pottage. That pottage, if you remember from earlier, is basically a hot swamp of mystery ingredients that's been simmering since your great-grandfather's funeral. Fruit might be available in the fall, but it rots quickly. Sugar is rare, expensive, and hoarded by the rich to show off their blackened teeth. Dairy, it's a gamble. Fresh milk spoils in hours. Butter and cheese are better, but they're loaded with bacteria. Still, you eat them anyway because it's either that or chew your boot leather. And let's talk about seasoning. Spices like pepper, cinnamon, or nutmeg, they're worth more than gold. For the average peasant, flavor comes from onions, salt, if you're lucky, and pain. Most meals taste like wet burlap, sprinkled with sadness. But food isn't just a health hazard, it's a political one. Game animals belong to the Lord, not you. If you get caught poaching a rabbit, you could be fined, imprisoned, or even executed. That's right, your dinner could get you hanged. So, you sit down to eat your gray stew by the flickering firelight, knowing every bite is a risk. But you eat it anyway, because, in the Middle Ages, food doesn't nourish you, it tests you. Now that your stomach is filled with questionable food, let's talk about what's next in your medieval debut, 'cause it's not over yet. You might think it's winding down, but don't get too relaxed just yet. In medieval Europe, the church is always watching. The priest is watching, and so is your neighbor Agnes, who will absolutely report you to the authorities if you miss Mass. Yes, religion isn't just part of life. In medieval Europe, it is life. The church controls everything: your calendar, your laws, your education, if you can read, your birth, marriage, death, basically everything in between. Every day is structured around prayer bells. The town church bell rings in the morning, at noon, and at night, not because people need reminders, but because missing prayer is considered a sin. Forget to bow, sin. Eat meat on a Friday, sin. Think about your neighbor's wife in a dream, double sign. And yes, hell is real, vividly real. Priests describe it in glorious detail. Rivers of fire, lakes of boiling blood, demons with pitchforks, and endless wailing. If the plague doesn't scare you, eternal damnation sure will. You can't read the Bible yourself, because it's written in Latin, a language reserved for monks, clergy, and the one noble kid who's too good for dirt. So you rely on the church to interpret everything for you. If the priest says your crop failure is because you didn't pray hard enough, well, guess what? You better kneel harder. Tithes, a tenth of everything you own, are mandatory. If you grow wheat, you give wheat. If you raise chickens, you give eggs. If you have nothing, well, congratulations, you're spiritually bankrupt and financially doomed. Holidays, they're actually holy days, dozens of them, and while they offer breaks from labor, they're not for fun. They're for attending Mass, fasting, confessing your sins, and reminding yourself that joy is a dangerous indulgence. If you dare question the church, well, heretics get burned. Witches get drowned, and blasphemers are flogged. Skeptics, they get reformed. So, you go through the motions, you chant, you bow, you pray, you hope that after enduring this dirt-covered life, your soul might finally land in paradise, assuming the priest likes you. Now, let's add one more layer to this wonderful medieval experience, being a woman. All the filth, famine, and fear are bad enough, but women also face childbirth, subservience, and social invisibility. In the Middle Ages, being a woman is like playing on hard mode, but without any health potions or a restart button. From birth, a girl's life path is practically locked in. Marry young, bear children, serve your husband, die tired. Education, not likely. Unless you're from a noble family and sent to a convent, your intellectual development stops around the time you learn how to churn butter and patch a tunic. Marriage happens really early. It's not weird to be betrothed at 12 and pregnant by 14. It's not about love. It's about land, livestock, and alliances. Your opinion, not required. Once married, you're basically your husband's property. Your job is to produce heirs, feed everyone, keep the house running, and whatever you do, don't complain. Complaining might get you branded as a nag or, worse, a witch. And that label comes with a complimentary drowning or burning, depending on what's in fashion in your town. Childbirth is a death lottery. There's no prenatal care, no sterile tools, no anesthesia. Midwives do their best, but even minor complications can mean death for the mother, the child, or both. Some women survive 10 pregnancies. Many don't survive even one. But don't worry, once the baby is born, your work increases. Now you have a screaming infant in a lice-ridden hut, and you're expected to nurse, cook, clean, and still help in the fields. There's no break for you. You are the break for everyone else. If you're unmarried, you're suspicious. If you're widowed, you're vulnerable. If you're outspoken, you're dangerous. Women who didn't conform were often accused of witchcraft, especially if they had herbal knowledge, a strong personality, or just looked at someone funny on a rainy Tuesday. Even in the church, your role is limited. Nuns lived under strict rules, no speaking without permission, no freedom of movement, and your spiritual worth always ranked below men. So, if you're a woman in the Middle Ages, you're expected to endure, obey, reproduce, and suffer in silence, ideally while smiling, because even in a time of universal suffering, women were somehow expected to suffer gracefully. But let's move on. You've battled filth, starvation, social injustice, and possibly a goat. But just when you think your day can't get any worse, here comes violence. Loud, bloody, and completely acceptable by medieval standards. Let's be clear, violence is everywhere. In the home, in the streets, on the battlefield, in church disputes, and sometimes even in line at the communal bread oven. Crime is common, punishment is brutal, and justice, well, justice is more like performance art than protection. Steal a loaf of bread, you could lose a hand. Accused of lying, your tongue might get pierced. Gossip too much. Meet the scold's bridle, a metal mask strapped to your head with a bar in your mouth. It's all for your correction, of course. Let's say you're accused of something more serious, like heresy, theft, or witchcraft. How do you prove your innocence? Easy, by being tortured, obviously. Welcome to trial by ordeal. One version, you stick your hand in boiling water to retrieve a stone. If it heals without infection in 3 days, you're innocent. If not, well, you're guilty. Another option, you're tossed into a river. If you sink, you're innocent and probably dead. If you float, you're guilty and you'll be punished anyway. It's like a medieval game show where the prize is survival, and the host is actively rooting against you. And if you're sentenced to death, don't worry, that's a public event. Executions are carried out in front of cheering crowds. Beheadings, hangings, burnings, sometimes people even bring snacks. It's the medieval equivalent of cable TV. Domestic violence, it's completely normal. Husbands are allowed, even expected, to discipline their wives and children. Street fights, totally commonplace. You could be beaten just for looking the wrong way at a noble's horse. And let's not forget war. It's always simmering in the background. Local feuds, territorial disputes, religious crusades, someone is always marching off to stab someone else in the name of honor, God, or boredom. Violence isn't some breakdown of society in the Middle Ages. It is society. Everyone lives with the constant knowledge that life is fragile, justice is arbitrary, and your neighbor might bash your head in over a pig. So, you walk carefully, keep your eyes down, and never trust anyone with a club. But hey, you've made it through the lice, the leeches, the laundreless misery, and the looming threat of public disembowelment. But here's the kicker. Most medieval lives don't end in a peaceful old age. They end in an early, unglamorous death. If you manage to make it to 40 years old, congratulations. You're practically a celebrity. You might even be referred to as the old one. But that's more of a statistical miracle than a nickname. Life expectancy in the Middle Ages hovers around 30 or 40 years. But that number is dragged down heavily by infant mortality. Nearly half of all children die before reaching age 5. Disease, malnutrition, or one bad winter are usually enough to take someone down. No vaccines, no antibiotics, no hope. If you survive childhood, you enter adulthood already exhausted. Work begins the moment you can walk upright. By the time you're 25, your joints are creaking like an old monastery door. You might be missing a finger, a tooth, and most of your original optimism. For women, the dangers are even worse, especially childbirth. It's one of the leading causes of death for medieval women. No pain relief, no medical intervention, just prayer, hot water, and someone holding your hand while you bleed out on a straw-stuffed cot. For men, the risks are different, but equally relentless. Farming accidents, infections from minor wounds, a neighbor's drunken rage, a crusade gone sideways. Even something as simple as walking to the market could end with a bandit or an angry tax collector crossing your path. Death could come quietly from the plague, which turned entire cities into cemeteries overnight, or from famine, which could last entire seasons, thinning out entire villages, or maybe bad luck. You ate some spoiled grain and spent your final hours hallucinating, screaming at the walls. And if you do manage to die, don't expect a luxurious funeral. You'll be buried quickly, likely to avoid disease. No embalming, no polished coffins, just a hole, a few quick prayers, and a shallow mound of earth if there's enough space left in the churchyard. So, yes, in medieval times, life was brutal, short, and constantly under siege by death in all its casual forms. You didn't retire, you just stopped showing up. And speaking of exits, let's move on to the final chapter of most medieval lives, death. But before we get to that, let's talk about a fascinating case, Catherine the Great. Long before she became Catherine the Great, Empress of all Russia, she was simply Sophie. Born Sophie Federica Augusta von Anhalt-Zerbsten, 1729. She was the daughter of a relatively obscure German princely family. Her tiny duchy in Pomerania had little power, but Sophie herself had something that no title could provide: razor-sharp intelligence, relentless charm, and a burning hunger for greatness. Her upbringing was strict. Her mother, Johanna, was cold and calculating, a social climber obsessed with status, while her father, a Prussian officer, was distant but disciplinary. Sophie learned to walk the fine line between obedience and cunning from a young age. She read voraciously, spoke multiple languages, and learned how to observe a room before speaking in its skills that would soon become survival tools in one of Europe's most brutal courts. When Empress Elizabeth Petrovna of Russia began searching for a wife for her heir, Grand Duke Peter, she looked beyond Russia's borders. Peter himself was of German descent, and Elizabeth believed a foreign bride would be more pliable and easier to control. Sophie fit the bill perfectly. Noble blood, Lutheran faith, which she would have to abandon, and a reputation for grace and humility. At just 14 years old, Sophie was summoned to Russia, where she arrived in the freezing capital of St. Petersburg in 1744, dressed in thin German fabrics and a diplomatic smile. Sophie's mother pushed her forward like a chess piece, but Sophie had her own game in mind. She wasn't just looking to fit into Russian society, she was determined to conquer it. To do that, she converted to Orthodoxy and took the name Catherine. This wasn't just a religious conversion. It was a symbolic break with her past, a commitment to a future that would require her to burn all bridges behind her. No one watching the quiet teenage girl in a fur-trimmed coat could have predicted what would come next: betrayal, revolution, enlightenment, and empire. But from the moment Catherine set foot in the Russian court, she stopped being a pawn and began planning how to become a queen. Catherine's marriage to Grand Duke Peter was supposed to secure her place in Russian royalty, but from the very beginning, it felt more like a cage than a crown. Peter, heir to the Russian throne, was not the charming prince of fairy tales. He was awkward, immature, and obsessed with toy soldiers. He was far more interested in playing war games in his chambers than governing an empire or showing any affection to his new wife. Some accounts even suggest he refused to consummate the marriage for years. He idolized Frederick the Great of Prussia and resented the Russian court that had adopted him. In contrast, Catherine embraced Russia with fierce determination. She learned the language, studied its history, and memorized Orthodox rituals. She wanted to belong, while Peter seemed to want to escape. This mismatch wasn't just emotional, it was political. The Russian court was a viper's nest of gossip, paranoia, and brutal power games. Empress Elizabeth was still alive, but her health was declining. Everyone knew a transition was coming, and everyone had an agenda. Catherine was watched constantly. Her letters were read, her friendships monitored, and her every move scrutinized. She couldn't trust her husband, her mother, or even her servants. In this world, alliances could turn into accusations overnight. But Catherine wasn't a fool. She knew how to play the game. She learned to cultivate allies in the shadows, charmed military officers, and made friends with scholars. She developed a reputation for dignity and restraint, a stark contrast to Peter's childish tantrums and open contempt for Russian traditions. Behind closed doors, Catherine began reading Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire and Montesquieu. While everyone else saw her as a young consort, she was building a vision, not just for herself, but for Russia, a vision of strength, education, and reason. However, there was one problem. The longer Peter lived, the longer Catherine remained in limbo, a powerless wife to a man unfit to rule. She waited, observed, and planned. Catherine knew that the Russian throne wouldn't be inherited. It would have to be taken. In 1762, after nearly 2 decades of waiting, watching, and quietly maneuvering, Catherine saw her moment. Empress Elizabeth died, and Peter III ascended the throne. But his reign quickly unraveled. He alienated the church, offended the nobility, insulted the army, and praised Prussia, Russia's longtime enemy. He reversed key policies, humiliated the clergy, and talked openly about divorcing Catherine to marry his mistress. The court, already wary of his erratic behavior, turned cold. Even ordinary Russians, devout and patriotic, saw Peter as a foreign puppet who mocked their traditions. Catherine, watching this unfold, made her move. In July of that same year, while Peter was away at his summer palace, Catherine launched a bloodless coup, supported by key military officers, including her lover, Gregory Orlov, and his influential brothers. She rode through St. Petersburg in full regalia and was proclaimed Empress Catherine II. She won the allegiance of the powerful imperial guard. Peter, caught off guard and without allies, surrendered within days. He was taken into custody, and shortly after, he was found dead under mysterious circumstances. Officially, it was reported as a hemorrhoidal colic. Unofficially, it was murder. Catherine was now empress not by birth, not by marriage, but by will, wit, and audacity. It was unprecedented. A foreign-born woman, with no legitimate claim, had taken the Russian throne without a single battle, but her real challenge was just beginning. Now, Catherine had to transform her bold grab for power into a lasting legacy. Could Russia accept her? Would the nobility respect her? Could she hold the empire together without falling victim to the same fate as her husband? Catherine understood that power gained through intrigue could be lost just as easily. She needed to rule not as a schemer, but as a visionary, and so began her transformation from a careful conspirator to a reforming empress, one who would redraw borders, embrace the Enlightenment, and redefine what it meant to be a woman in power. Once Catherine had the crown, she could have rested on her laurels, but she didn't. She had something bigger in mind than simply sitting on a throne. She wanted to transform Russia, not just militarily or politically, but intellectually. While Peter had worshipped Frederick the Great and toy soldiers, Catherine idolized Voltaire and the bold thinkers of the Enlightenment. She believed in reason, progress, education, and the role of a monarch as a servant of the people, even if she herself ruled with absolute authority. Catherine didn't just read Enlightenment philosophy, she lived it. She corresponded directly with Voltaire for over 15 years, flattering him while defending her autocracy. She invited Diderot to her court and even purchased his entire library to support him financially. Behind closed doors, she pored over legal texts, debated reforms, and crafted policies to modernize the empire. Her early reign was filled with efforts to codify Russian law. She formed the Legislative Commission in 1767, an ambitious project intended to rewrite Russia's entire legal code. Catherine's own Nakaz instruction was a political manifesto in disguise, one that spoke of equality before the law, the dangers of torture, and the responsibility of rulers to serve the common good. For an empress in 18th century Russia, it was radical, but Enlightenment ideals had to survive the realities of Russia, a vast, feudal, deeply conservative land ruled by nobles who liked their serfs exactly where they were beneath them. Catherine knew this, so while she advocated reform, she moved carefully. She abolished some forms of torture, expanded access to secular education, and built schools and libraries. But she also reaffirmed the nobility's control over their serfs, keeping them loyal. This was Catherine's balancing act, a philosopher queen in public, a practical empress in private. She walked a tightrope between ideology and survival, between the shining salons of Paris and the gritty politics of Moscow. Her vision for Russia was bold, but always calculated. In many ways, Catherine wasn't trying to make Russia European. She was trying to make Russia modern, on her own terms, and that meant reform, yes, but with an iron hand in a velvet glove.